Hello, welcome to another exploration of the gene keys. My name is Shaena. Today's gene key is the 38th gene key. This is the shadow of struggle, the gift of perseverance, and the city of honor. If this is your first time joining, welcome. All of the gene keys, there are 64 of them. They are part of a living wisdom. They represent 64 genes that live inside of each individual, inside of humanity. And while some gene keys are a little bit more present in our specific expressions, we have access to all 64 gene keys at all times. And as we contemplate them, they begin to activate inside of us. They begin to work on us. So through contemplating them, we are connecting in with this living wisdom. So today we'll be looking at the 38th gene key. The programming partner of the 38th gene key is the 39th gene key, which we have already covered. So if you're curious to learn about the 39th, I encourage you to go check out the recordings. The 38th gene key is part of the codon ring, known as the ring of humanity. That includes gene keys 10, 17, 21, 25, 38, and 51. Physiologically, this gene key relates to our adrenals, and it is related or tied to the amino acid known as arginine. So that's a lot of information. And as we move through this exploration, I just really want to preface it by reminding you that the gene keys are intended to be contemplated. What that means is we're not asserting the mind to try and grab on to the information. And we're also not necessarily just passively sitting there allowing the information to wash over us as we would do in meditation. Instead, it's somewhere in the middle, right? We're being curious about what we're receiving, and we're allowing that receptivity to begin working on us. So this contemplation, you can, as we go through it, this exploration, as you contemplate, you can start to tie it to maybe people in your life, relationships, situations, but you can start to notice, essentially notice what you're noticing. And I personally love the gene keys. I think it's a really fun way to not only understand myself, but also understand humanity. Each gene key, as I mentioned, has a shadow frequency, a gift frequency, and a city frequency. And the idea is that we want to spend only about 10% of our time in the shadow frequency. It can be easy to really focus our energy and attention on that shadow frequency. But as we are contemplating this in our lives, maybe not necessarily today, but as we move this information out into our lives, we really want to do our best to spend the majority of our time in that gift frequency. Another beautiful piece about the gene keys is that all frequencies are related, right? So the shadow frequency is encapsulated in the gift frequency, and those two are encapsulated in the city frequency. So rather than looking at it as a linear trajectory, it's actually more like a spherical kind of like Russian nesting dolls situation, where each of those pieces, right, the shadow comes along with us. As we go to the gift, we're just transmuting that energy into a higher frequency. And then same still when we get to the city, we have transmuted that energy even further to reach that citic state. So with that, we will dive into this gene keys exploration. So let's talk briefly about the importance of the 38th and the 39th shadows, because these two are programming partners, and their shadows are actually really important to humanity. This is an ancient genetic programming that's based on individual survival. So without either of these shadows, 38 or 39, there probably would be no humans walking the earth. And I think that's really important to kind of preface this exploration with, because it shows us that, yes, we don't want to spend all of our time in the shadow frequency. However, there are ways that the shadow frequency has actually benefited us. It has benefited and helped us to get to where we are. So let's just kind of recognize that we don't need to turn our noses up to the shadow. We don't need to try to stuff it away, but actually, if we can shine a light on it, if we can honor it, which is the city of this specific gene key, but if we can honor that shadow for the ways that it has benefited us, then we're able to actually access the energy to then transmute it. And so the energy of these shadows represents a primal energy whose main instinct when threatened is aggression, right? And there are ways where having some aggression actually helps us as humans, as animals, essentially survive. So this gene key is also deeply connected to individual health and well-being. All right, the 38th shadow, struggle. So most often this shadow manifests in relationships when one or both people are not feeling fulfilled in their lives. There is an essence of struggle that is actually beneficial to us, right? It helps to kind of motivate us from that negative end. However, when that struggle is tied with suffering, that's when it also becomes more shadowy. So this particular shadow, the shadow of struggle, is really about the battle to find a sense of purpose in life. Because if there is no real alignment of purpose within a being, then the provocation carries a frequency resulting in a destructive dynamic. Provocation is the shadow of the 39th gene key. So these two work together because they're programming partners. So when we don't have a real alignment of purpose within ourselves, then that shadow frequency of provocation kind of eggs on this struggle shadow frequency, and it results in a destructive dynamic. And every relationship has its own inner purpose. But if the purpose of the two individuals in the relationship is not initially aligned, doesn't mean it has to be the same, but if it's not aligned, then the true nature of the relationship never has a chance to reveal itself, right? If we're always in this place of struggle, if we are not aligned with our own purpose, and then we come into relationship with another individual who is also not aligned with their purpose, then the true purpose of that relationship can't actually reveal itself, versus a situation where you're aligned in your purpose, the other person is aligned in their purpose, and then the true nature of that relationship can reveal itself. So this 38th gene key holds a great secret to breaking that addictive pattern of struggle. And that is to simply take a breath. Struggle is a pattern that locks you into a certain breath pattern that makes you totally forget yourself, as well as rendering you deaf to all outside influence. Right? If you think about it this way, if you're holding your breath, you have constriction inside of your body. You're kind of just gasping and you just keep going, right? But when you're able to simply pause and take a breath, it creates a gap in that pattern, in that struggle pattern. And by creating gaps in that pattern, you enable transformations to occur. And it's usually in these gaps that the answer to the struggle is revealed. So if you think about struggle as kind of just like a train that keeps going with like seemingly never ending cars, right? There's nowhere for anything to go through. You just have all of these train cars continuing to go by on the track. However, when the train pauses, then you're able to actually see the gaps between the train cars. You're able to actually unhook the train cars, put something new between them. You're able to see the space and to utilize that space. And so that image applies here to this shadow of struggle. When we're in this shadow of struggle, we are on that train that just won't stop. We can't even see, let alone access the gaps between the train cars. And so the 38th and the 39th shadows see everything at a personal level. They have very little perspective. They're just tunnel vision. This is where I am. I'm in the struggle. I'm deaf to everything around me. And the 38th shadow is not an archetype that thinks. If it feels threatened in any way, it will react aggressively and without consideration of who might be hurt. Right? Again, it's that tunnel vision. It's an inability to think about the repercussions of the actions that they're about to take. It's an inability to see beyond what they're inside of. And so struggle, this shadow of struggle, maintains the illusion of your separate identity. Right? We've talked about it on previous gene keys. I'll mention it here. But when we're in that shadow frequency, we're stuck in our mind. We're operating from a place of fear. And we see ourselves as completely separate from everyone and everything around us. When we get into the gift frequency, we're tuning into our heart. We're finding more of a harmonious balance between the head and the heart. We're not quite at the whole oneness idea, but we can see that we are a part of something bigger. And then when we get to the city frequency, we are in full coherence with the energy and frequency of love. And we have completely merged back into the one, right? So in the shadow, we're one, but we're completely separate. In the gift, we're seeing our role in the collective. And then in the city, we merge back into the one, but we see all of us as a single organism, not separate from one another, as a single organism that is one with the divine. So this shadow of struggle maintains that illusion of separateness. And the gift holds the invitation to transcend the separateness. But at the shadow level, aka the fear level, we never stop long enough to take a breath to allow that energy to come in. And so there's an energy of stubbornness and deafness within this gene key that results in a planet where most of the world still has to struggle to survive. Right? We're so attached to this idea of struggle. We're in that tunnel vision. We're deaf to anything else, to any other possibility. And when we as a planet, as a collective, are in this shadow, before this shadow has been transcended, transmuted at the collective level, that's where we realize that the majority of the world still has to struggle to survive. And even those who do not appear to struggle outwardly are still struggling inwardly through the stresses of living lives without a strong sense of purpose, right? This gene key is all about that sense of purpose. There's another gene key whose shadow is the shadow of purposelessness. So this is a beautiful gene key to start to see how all of these gene keys weave together, right? Not one of them operates completely separate outside of the others, just as we do not operate outside of the collective. But when we're in this shadow frequency, that is how we're seeing, perceiving, and operating as separate, operating outside of the collective. And so when we feel that we don't have a sense of purpose, we're stuck in this place of struggle. So the repressive nature of this gene key is identified as the defeatist. This is when the inner energy within this gene key collapses. So individuals that express the repressive nature have enormous amounts of tension stored in their bodies. And this tension results from failure to direct their huge life force energy in a direction that serves a higher purpose than their own. Our life force energy is not meant to be withheld. It's not meant to be constricted. It's meant to flow out. It's meant to support our purpose in this life. And when we don't know what that is, we don't have a way to direct this life force energy out. And so instead it gets stored up and it creates huge levels of tension inside of us. And it takes a huge inner motivation within the individual who has this repressive nature to lift themselves free of their own inner demons. And once they find a cause worth fighting for, once they align with their purpose, suddenly all of the latent energy, all of that tension, all of that unused life force energy is then released into the world, and the tension leaves their being. Right? So when we don't have an idea of what our purpose is, when we don't have a direction to send our life force energy, we can feel defeated. We can feel hopeless. And then the flip side of this is the reactive nature, which in this gene key is aggressive. So individuals with the reactive nature cannot help fighting, yet they always end up fighting the wrong people at the wrong time. This reactive nature is all about projection. People who project their anger and aggression into and onto others. These are people who embody the very definition of struggle, to fight for no purpose. There's a difference between fighting for love, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But when we're fighting for no purpose, we're simply perpetuating the shadow frequency of struggle. And having no sense of purpose, these individuals are constantly locked in combat with others in order to release the pent-up tension in their bodies. So the repressive nature, they just keep holding on to that tension, to that life force energy. And the reactive nature, they're just constantly spewing it out through arguments, through fights, through combat, whatever it is, but they're spewing it out. They're not intentionally directing it towards their purpose. They're just throwing it out there. They're reacting, they're aggressive because they can't handle the tension. So they just release it however they can. And they become addicted to fighting as a means to discharge that tension. Right? So if you have tension inside of you and you don't have a clear, aligned way to channel that energy, to channel that tension, then you're just going to look for any outlet, and then you're going to become addicted to that. rather than becoming addicted to serving your higher purpose. So if these individuals are able to channel the aggression into some kind of higher purpose, they immediately drop their aggressiveness and transform the shadow into the gift. So again, the way to move from this shadow into the gift is to align with your higher purpose, to align with any higher purpose, I guess. You know, like you don't need to put the pressure on yourself to find your purpose. But if you're able to open things up and just align and begin to serve some higher purpose, some purpose rooted in love, then you begin to transform, to transmute that shadow into the gift. So before we move into the gift, I will just pause here and invite you to contemplate, to feel into, to be curious about the way that this shadow of struggle shows up in your life, or the way that it has shown up in your life. All right, so moving into the gift of perseverance. So this gift invites you to transcend your separateness through your individuality by means of serving a goal beyond yourself. Right? The shadow is all about me, me, me. And the gift, the heart, is about serving something beyond you. And through serving something beyond you, you are aligning with your purpose. So the 38th gift is designed for obstacles, and obstacles test your commitment and surrender, allowing you to forge new skills and hone your excellence. Obstacles are always gifts in disguise. So this 38th gift of perseverance is an energy and a frequency that allows you to persevere through these obstacles, to stay consistent, to show up, to stay committed to that purpose, to move through the obstacles. And people with this gift tend to make the impossible look effortless. These are people that are extremely active and physical. They have a genetic need to push their bodies, and they love being right in the thick of the action. And the trick for them is to know when to act and when not to act. The gift of perseverance is knowing when to hold energy back. These are people who have learned to draw a breath before they rush into some new action. Right? So if the shadow frequency, you're unable to take a breath, you're constantly just going, going, going. The gift is having the ability, having the wisdom and the knowing to pause, to take a breath, and then decide if you want to go into the situation or not. The breath is simply to make sure that they're responding from truth rather than reacting from fear or anger. So whereas the shadow frequency is fighting because there's a sense of purposelessness, because there's a feeling of disconnect. The shadow fights from a place of fear. The 38th gift fights for love, and it battles against the collective frequency of fear. The 38th gift does not think what it's doing, right? It's not up here in the brain, in the mind. It simply knows in its heart when something is right And once it has committed its full energy to its appointed task, it will never back down. So the 38th gift of perseverance is about fighting for love. It's about aligning, knowing where that fight needs to happen, and then continually showing up for it, never backing down. Right? We're not in the struggle of fighting for no purpose. We're fighting for love. We're fighting against the collective frequency of fear. And it's that energy, it's that fight, it's that commitment to that fight that is this gift of perseverance. And this gift level, through this perseverance, it ensures that love always wins over fear. And over time, through perseverance, love, and trust, you will eventually attain victory and experience your own divinity. It's a long game, people. It's about winning the war, not just the battle, right? The shadow is only concerned about, will I win this battle? And the gift is about fighting for the bigger picture, fighting for the bigger mission, infusing love back into everything, persevering through the obstacles to allow love to fuel the fight, not fear. To allow this alignment with the higher purpose of love to be that beacon of light that we are focused on, and we're not wavering until we get there. We are so committed to getting to that place of bringing love everywhere, of overcoming fear, that nothing is going to stop us. So pausing here, inviting you to just feel what it feels like to be committed to love, to be committed to fighting for love, to be in this place of offering, of persevering through love. In one of the contemplations for this gene key, he talks about how Dante's Inferno is like a great analogy for this specific gene key, and how that purgatory, that middle level, in a lot of ways relates to this gift, right? Because you're no longer just blindly in fear, and at the same time, you haven't quite fully transcended everything. So you're in this place where you know better. You know what it's like to be in fear, but you know that you're not quite at that final destination, at that ascended place. And so it's in this purgatory that this gift of perseverance really comes into play. That this gift of perseverance drives us forward to move, to continue moving through the purgatory until we get to that ascended place. And it's uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable, but it's worth it. It's worth it to live in a place of, from a place of love, rather than from a place of fear. All right, so moving into the siddhi, this is SIDDHI, not a city in the middle of a state or something like that. This is a siddhic frequency, so a high ascended frequency of energy. And this is the siddhi of honor. And honor is the energy field of every single human being when they are living their individual truth. I'll say that again. Honor is the energy field of every single human being when they are living their individual truth. Honor turns combat into a dance. It's the sword play of love itself. And I will say that once we get to the city frequency, oftentimes words don't really do this frequency justice, because words come from the mind, and this frequency has far ascended beyond the mind. So if you have a challenging time understanding, remember, we're contemplating. We're allowing this information, this intelligence to work on us, to work through us. So just be curious, see what resonates. And if something doesn't resonate, see how you can sit with it just a little bit longer. So honor turns that energy of combat into a dance. And it's the sword play of love itself. Honor is rooted in a love so pure that it sacrifices itself without a thought to serve a higher aspiration. Right? So honor, it's a word that gets used a lot. But what does it really mean? What is the essence of this energy? It's energy, it's action, it's a state of being that is rooted in such pure love that it has transcended beyond the individual, sacrifices itself without a thought to serve a higher aspiration, right? Oftentimes, military generals or whatever status, people will be identified as honorable. And oftentimes that's because they sacrificed themselves for a greater good, for a higher aspiration, right? They didn't sacrifice themselves for fear or any of those lower frequencies. They sacrificed themselves from a place of total alignment with love, with a higher mission, with a higher purpose. They were so aligned with that state of being that they effortlessly sacrificed themselves in service of something greater than themselves. And every act of honor carries with it an equalizing force into the world rather than a divisive force. So this equalizing force unites people. So if the honorable act brings people together into the high frequency, into the high frequency field, it's an act of honor. If the act brings people together, but in a lower frequency field, it's not an act of honor, because that lower frequency field is a field of divisiveness, of separateness. And so to truly be in the field of honor, or the energy, the frequency of honor, we are serving a higher mission. We are serving love, and we are bringing people together into a high frequency, right? The city is all about ascending back to a state of oneness with source. And so this act of honor carries an equalizing force that brings people together closer to that state of oneness, with source. And to honor someone is to hold them to their highest frequency, no matter what their current frequency may be. So honor really is about bringing people up to that highest frequency. And when we honor someone, We're holding them to the highest frequency, regardless of their current frequency, right? It's an act of love. We love them so much that we're bringing them up. We're holding them to their highest frequency, regardless of what their current frequency might be. So there's so much more that we can always say about all of these, but I will leave it there for now. And I will remind you that the city frequency happens spontaneously. It's not something that you can study for. You get to the citic state when you are so fully immersed in the energy of love. And it happens without trying. When you start trying to get there, you're actually getting further away. You're postponing the ascension, all of those things. So let us allow love to bring us into alignment with our purpose. With that, I hope you have a beautiful day, and I look forward to supporting you on this journey. Would love to hear from you, your takeaways, how you're liking these explorations, and I will see you next time. Bye.